Thank you very much for those very warm words of welcome, Professor Malalike, and also can I acknowledge the invitation that's been generated through the efforts of Mrs. Veltzman as well. It's a great pleasure to be here. I've been in Pretoria for a week. I feel as if I've come to understand some of the surroundings here, but only scratching the surface. I should offer a disclaimer or two as well, which is that for my sins, as well as being someone associated with open access, as the introductory remarks mentioned, I also am a director on the board of the commercialisation company of my university, which is a company called Blue Box, and I also sit on the publishing board of the CSIRO, and in those roles have a view, and I'm happy to talk at the end about a total balanced approach to all of the things that are important to an academy, to a university, and to the world of scholarly communication. First, a little bit of context. Can I just explain that a University of Technology in Australia is not what a University of Technology is in Europe, for example. So it doesn't convey the sense of being mainly about engineering. It's an eclectic mix of faculties. You can see them up there. And in the case of QUT, we also have 4 significant research institutes with another one to be launched in a year or so in the science technology area. Brisbane is the 3rd city of Australia. There is another slide which shows the main campus with the river in a big ribbon surrounding it. If I could have taken that picture a month ago, the ribbon would have been rather swollen. It's one of 3 large universities. Between them they account for about 120,000 students, some of whom are international, but most of whom are Australian domestic students. And just recently, in the exercise of research ranking in Australia called ERA, which stands for Excellence in Research in Australia, those 3 universities all finished in the top 12 out of the 40. And I'll say a bit more about research vitality and research growth in association with improvements in the exposure and visibility of research as I go on. Turning to the issue of open access, one of the important things to do is to define it. You get a number of definitions. I like this one. It's simple. It's penned by a journalist in the Times Higher Education Supplement in late 2009. And the most important thing about this simple description is to then understand that in general there are 2 ways of doing this. One of them is by having an institutional profile through an institutional archive or repository where authors or support services are involved in placing those articles online at the time that they're accepted for publication. And the other is through the development of open access journals as new business forms. And I'll talk about both, but what I thought might be useful in the context of discussing the relationship between research success and visibility and the open access background to that is to take you through the story at my university which has brought us to the present time, and then to talk about the way we also go about supporting open access journals as a form of publishing. I should take about 25 or 30 minutes. I hope to leave time for a discussion on as many topics as you would like to raise towards the end of the time. We share with South Africa in Australia a particular history when it comes to the cost of scholarly communication. Our leading universities and research institutions have to deal with something which is global, which is that those costs seem to become extremely high, particularly, I would say, in the last 2 decades of the 20th century. This is further complicated in our case by the need to import, and when I say complicated, I mean that in the print era, only a small number of journals, and this is probably worse in Australia than anywhere else, but only a small number of journals that were high demand could afford to be air freighted into the country. When the internet arrived, the change for our country, our education system, our research activity was quite critical. And of course, until recently, and I must say until recently, because things have changed in the last year or so, but until recently, the currencies in which we purchased the most important of our scholarly literature, particularly in scientific, engineering, medical areas, would usually be the euro or any of its predecessor currencies, the British pound and the US dollar. And the fate of the Australian dollar, once it was floated in the 1980s against those currencies, was to drop sharply from where it had been. And it has taken 25 years or so to develop parity with the US dollar, and there is no guarantee at all that that will be sustained. When large world events occur, what we tend to see is that smaller currencies depreciate against the larger ones. So we have always to deal with that issue.